Maya's hands were still trembling from turning away the shabby old man when her manager's face went white at the sight of the ring on the stranger's finger. What that ancient Japanese crest meant would cost her everything she thought she knew about herself. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Sometimes the most catastrophic mistakes of our lives happen in the space between a glance and a judgment. For Maya Chun, a 26-year-old waitress at the prestigious Sakura Garden restaurant, that space lasted exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds to look at the weathered man shuffling through the polished glass doors. 7 seconds to notice his worn wool coat and scuffed shoes. 7 seconds to decide he didn't belong in her world of white tablecloths and crystal stemware. What she didn't see in those 7 seconds was the ring, and by the time she did, it was already too late. The Sakura Garden sat on the corner of 5th and Madison like a jewel box of old world elegance transplanted into the heart of the modern city. Its reputation had been built over 3 generations, a temple of Japanese haute cuisine where reservations were secured months in advance and where the wrong shoes could get you turned away at the door. Maya had worked there for 4 years, long enough to know every unspoken rule, every subtle hierarchy, every way that money and status announced themselves before a word was spoken. She knew how to read a Patek Philippe watch at 20 paces, could distinguish between a tailored suit and one off the rack with a single glance, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to predict which customers would tip well and which would leave her with nothing but a dismissive nod. It was a Tuesday evening, that peculiar lull between the late lunch crowd and the early dinner reservations when the restaurant held its breath in elegant silence. Maya was resetting table 12, smoothing the cream linen cloth with practiced efficiency. When she heard the soft chime of the entrance door, she looked up and felt her professional smile freeze on her face. The man who entered looked like he had wandered in from another world entirely. He was elderly, perhaps in his late 70s, with skin weathered by time and what looked like years of outdoor labor. His gray hair was neatly combed, but longer than current fashion, touching the collar of a brown wool coat that had seen better decades. The coat itself, while clean, was visibly worn at the cuffs and elbows, the kind of garment that spoke of careful maintenance rather than replacement. His shoes were sensible brown leather, scuffed and creased with age. He carried no briefcase, no designer bag, nothing that signaled wealth or status. He simply stood there in the entrance, his dark eyes taking in the restaurant with a strange mixture of recognition and melancholy. Maya's mind raced through her training. The Sakura Garden had a dress code, strictly enforced. Jackets required for men, no athletic wear, no torn or overly casual clothing. The management had always been clear about maintaining standards, about preserving the restaurant's exclusive atmosphere. She glanced toward the host stand where James, the evening manager, was reviewing the reservation book. He hadn't looked up yet, hadn't seen the man. This was her call to make. The elderly man began to move forward, his gait slow but steady, heading toward the dining room as if he had every right to be there. Maya intercepted him halfway across the entrance vestibule, her professional smile now tinged with apologetic firmness. She had done this before, turned away inappropriately dressed customers, though usually they were younger, tourists who hadn't read the fine print or locals who thought their casual wealth exempted them from rules. "Excuse me, sir," Maya said, her voice gentle but clear. "I'm terribly sorry, but we have a dress code at Sakura Garden. Jackets are required for all male guests in the dining room." The man stopped and looked at her fully for the first time. His face was a landscape of deep lines, each one telling a story of laughter or sorrow or years spent squinting into the sun. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and held a depth that momentarily unsettled her. There was no anger in his expression, no indignation, only a profound weariness that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within. "I see," he said quietly. His voice was accented, the careful English of someone who had learned the language late in life but had perfected it through decades of use. His tone was neither defensive nor apologetic. It simply was, like a statement of fact. "I have a reservation." Maya felt a flicker of uncertainty. She glanced back toward James, who had finally looked up from his book and was now watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. The host station kept meticulous records, and she knew that every reservation was vetted. Every name cross-referenced with the restaurant's extensive database of regular customers, food critics, and VIPs. It seemed unlikely that someone dressed as this man would have successfully made a reservation, let alone be in their system. "May I have your name, sir?" Maya asked, maintaining her professional courtesy even as doubt crept into her voice. The man's expression didn't change. He looked past her into the dining room toward a specific table in the far corner by the window, the one with the view of the small private garden that gave the restaurant its name. Table 23. It was the best table in the house, always reserved for the most important guests, or held open for walk-ins of significant stature. "Takahashi," the man said simply. "Kenji Takahashi. Table 23 at 7 o'clock. Maya felt her heart sink. She knew that name. Everyone who worked at Sakura Garden knew that name. Takahashi Enterprises was one of the largest commercial real estate development firms in the city, with holdings that included the very building in which the restaurant sat. The Takahashi family were legends in both the Japanese expatriate community and the broader business world, known for their discretion, their old-world values, and their immense wealth. They were also notoriously private, avoiding publicity and social media with an almost religious fervor. But the Takahashi family members who occasionally dined at Sakura Garden arrived in chauffeured cars wearing bespoke suits and accompanied by assistants. They moved through the world with the quiet confidence of inherited wealth and unquestioned power. They did not arrive alone, on foot, wearing threadbare coats. Maya glanced again at James, who had now closed the reservation book and was walking toward them, his face carefully neutral but his eyes sharp with assessment. In that moment, Maya made her decision. The name could be a coincidence. This could be an elderly man confused about his reservation. Or worse, someone trying to exploit the reputation of a powerful family for a free meal. She had seen it before, though, admittedly never executed with such quiet dignity. "Sir, I'm going to need to verify that with our host," Maya said, her voice taking on a firmer edge. "If you could please wait here at the entrance while we check our records." James reached them, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic. He was a tall man in his 40s with silver temples and the bearing of someone who had spent years managing the intersection of hospitality and hierarchy. He gave the elderly man a quick, appraising look that took in every detail of his appearance in less than a second. "Good evening," James said with professional courtesy that held no warmth. "I understand there's a question about a reservation?" The elderly man, Kenji Takahashi, if that was indeed his name, simply nodded. His weathered hands hung at his sides, and Maya noticed for the first time that despite the worn coat and scuffed shoes, his fingernails were impeccably clean and neatly trimmed. It was a small detail, but it nagged at her, suggesting a level of personal care inconsistent with the rest of his appearance. "I have a reservation for 7 o'clock, the man repeated. "Table 23, my usual table." There was no emphasis on the word usual, no attempt to assert status or familiarity. He stated it the way one might mention the weather, a simple fact requiring no embellishment. James pulled out his phone, opening the reservation system with practiced efficiency. Maya watched his face as he scrolled through the evening's bookings, saw the slight frown that crossed his features, and then watched it deepen into something more troubling. He looked up at the man, then back at his phone, then at the man again. "There is a reservation under that name," James said slowly, and Maya heard the unspoken but hanging in the air. "However, there seems to be some confusion. The reservation was made by Takahashi Enterprises' corporate office, and they specifically indicated it was for a business dinner. We were expecting a party of 4. The elderly man's expression didn't change. His dark eyes remained steady, patient, as if he had all the time in the world to wait for these younger people to sort through their confusion. "I called myself," he said quietly. "I asked for my usual table. I come alone. It has been many years. Perhaps your records are not updated." Maya felt a cold prickle of uncertainty crawling up her spine. There was something in the man's voice, a quiet authority that spoke of truth, even as every visual cue screamed that he couldn't possibly be who he claimed to be. And yet she had already set events in motion. She had already made her judgment in those first 7 seconds, and now she was committed to seeing it through. James's jaw tightened. "Sir, with all due respect, we need to verify your identity. The Takahashi family is well known to us, and I'm sure you'll understand that we need to be certain." Maya saw a flicker of something in the old man's eyes then, the first crack in his serene patience. It wasn't anger exactly, more like a deep, bone-weary sadness. The look of someone who had seen this play out before and knew exactly how it would end. He slowly reached into his coat pocket, and Maya instinctively tensed before feeling fooled. What did she think he was going to pull out? A weapon? What he withdrew instead was a wallet, old leather-worn, soft with age. He opened it and extracted a driver's license, handing it to James with steady fingers. As he did so, Maya saw it for the first time. On his right hand, adorning his ring finger, was a ring unlike anything she had ever seen. It was gold, but not the bright yellow gold of modern jewelry. This was a deeper, richer color, almost amber in the dim light of the entrance vestibule. The face of the ring bore an intricate design, what looked like a family crest, a mon as they were called in Japanese tradition. At the center was a stylized crane, its wings spread in flight, surrounded by a circular border of what appeared to be wisteria blossoms. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the details so fine that even from a few feet away Maya could see the individual feathers on the crane's wings, each petal on the flowers. It was clearly very old, very valuable, very, very significant. James looked at the license, and Maya saw all the color drain from his face. His hands, which had been steady moments before, began to tremble slightly. He looked from the license to the old man's face and back again, his expression shifting from skepticism to horror to panic in the space of 3 heartbeats. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its professional authority and emerged as a hoarse whisper. "Mr. Takahashi, I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. I didn't realize. We had no idea. Please forgive me." The old man simply took back his license and returned it to his wallet with the same unhurried movements. He said nothing, but the silence spoke volumes. Maya felt the full weight of her mistake crashing down on her like a collapsing building. This wasn't just a wealthy customer she had insulted. Based on James's reaction, this was someone far more important, someone whose presence should have been met with the kind of reverence reserved for heads of state or royalty. "Please," James continued, now almost begging. Let me escort you to your table immediately. Can I offer you a drink, our finest steak, anything you'd like, completely on the house, please? But Kenji Takahashi was already turning toward the door, moving with that same slow, steady gait that had carried him in. I think not, he said quietly. It seems I'm not appropriately dressed for your establishment. I will dine elsewhere. The words were delivered without rancor, without sarcasm, but they hit Maya like physical blows. As he pushed open the glass door and stepped back out into the evening, Maya's eyes were drawn once more to that ring, catching the streetlight as his hand moved. In that instant, she understood with terrible clarity that she had just made a mistake that would define the rest of her life. She had judged a book by its cover, and in doing so had not only insulted a man of immense importance, but had potentially cost the restaurant its most significant relationship. The door closed with a soft click, and Kenji Takahashi disappeared into the city night, leaving behind only the memory of his weathered face, his worn wool coat, and the gleam of an ancient family crest that Maya would see in her nightmares for years to come. The silence that followed Kenji Takahashi's departure was absolute. The kind of silence that occurs when the world holds its breath before a storm breaks. Maya stood frozen in the entrance vestibule, her mind struggling to process what had just happened, while James remained motionless beside her, still staring at the glass door as if willing the old man to return. The reservation book lay forgotten on the host stand. The elegant dining room behind them continued its hushed symphony of clinking silverware and murmured conversation. Blissfully unaware that something catastrophic had just occurred in their midst, James was the first to move. He turned to Maya with an expression she had never seen on his face before, a mixture of rage and fear that made him look suddenly older. His carefully maintained composure shattered like dropped crystal. His voice when he finally spoke was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a shout. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you have any concept of who that man is? Maya's throat had gone dry. She tried to speak, but could only manage a weak shake of her head. The ring, that extraordinary ring with its crane and wisteria blossoms, kept flashing in her memory like a beacon she had been too blind to see. I thought, she began, but James cut her off with a sharp gesture. You thought, he repeated, his voice dripping with bitter disbelief. You thought you knew better than our reservation system. You thought you could judge a man's worth by his coat. You thought wrong, Maya. So catastrophically wrong that I don't even know where to begin explaining the damage you've caused. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and began scrolling frantically. Maya watched as his face went from red to pale to almost gray in the space of seconds. He was reading something, she realized, something that was making the situation even worse than she had imagined. When he looked up at her again, there was something close to desperation in his eyes. Kenji Takahashi isn't just a member of the Takahashi family, James said, his voice hollow. He is the Takahashi family, the founder, the patriarch. Everything they have, everything they've built started with him. He came to this country in 1947 with nothing but a suitcase and a dream, and he built an empire that now owns half of this city's commercial real estate. This restaurant, the building we're standing in right now, the entire block, he owns all of it. And you just turned him away at the door like he was some vagrant off the street. The words hit Maya like physical blows, each one worse than the last. She felt her legs go weak and had to reach out to steady herself against the host stand. The implications were cascading through her mind like dominoes falling. She hadn't just insulted a wealthy customer, she had humiliated the landlord, the man who quite literally owned the ground beneath their feet, the man who, with a single phone call, could shut down Sakura Garden forever. I didn't know, Maya whispered, the words sounding pathetically inadequate even to her own ears. How was I supposed to know? He looked so... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence because any way she completed it would only dig her grave deeper. That's precisely the point, James said, his voice sharp with barely controlled fury. You weren't supposed to know by looking at him. You were supposed to check. You were supposed to verify. You were supposed to treat every person who walks through that door with respect until proven otherwise. Not make snap judgments based on their appearance. That's hospitality 1-0-1, Maya. Something I thought you learned years ago. Before Maya could respond, James's phone rang. He looked at the screen and visibly flinched. The color drained from his face completely, leaving him looking almost corpse-like under the warm lighting of the entrance. He answered with a trembling hand. Sakura Garden, this is James speaking. How may I help you? Maya couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she could see James's reaction. Posture changed, becoming rigid and formal in a way she had never witnessed before. He said yes, and I understand, and of course repeatedly, his voice getting smaller with each acknowledgement. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but when he hung up, James looked like a man who had just received a death sentence. That was Takahashi Enterprises' corporate office, he said flatly. Mr. Takahashi has already informed them of what happened. They want a full incident report on their desk by tomorrow morning, including the names of everyone involved. He paused, meeting Maya's eyes with a look that held no mercy. They're also demanding a formal explanation for why their founder and chairman emeritus was treated with what they're calling unprecedented disrespect and discrimination. The word discrimination hit Maya like ice water. She hadn't thought of it that way, hadn't considered how her actions might appear through that lens. But of course, that's how it looked. An elderly Japanese man in modest clothing turned away from a high-end Japanese restaurant by a younger staff member who made assumptions based purely on appearance. The optics were terrible, potentially catastrophic not just for the restaurant but for her personally. Maya felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I need to apologize," she said urgently. "I need to call him, go to him, something. I need to make this right, James. There has to be a way to fix this." James let out a short, bitter laugh that held no whatsoever. "Fix this, Maya? You don't understand the magnitude of what you've done. Kenji Takahashi isn't just wealthy and powerful. He's a living legend in the Japanese business community. He's a man who survived the war, came to this country with nothing, faced discrimination and hardship that would have broken most people, and built something extraordinary through sheer will and integrity. He's written books, given speeches at universities, been honored by 3 different Japanese prime ministers, and he's known absolutely famous for his humility, for never flaunting his wealth, for treating everyone from janitors to CEOs with the same respect." The picture James was painting made Maya feel physically ill. She had heard stories, of course, whispered tales among the staff about the mysterious Takahashi family and their legendary patriarch. But like most young people in the city, she had assumed those were exaggerations, myths built up around wealthy families to make them seem more interesting than they really were. She had never imagined she would actually encounter the man himself, let alone turn him away at the door. "There's one more thing," James continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Something you need to understand about that ring you probably noticed. That family crest isn't just decoration. The Takahashi-mon, registered with the Japanese government and recognized as one of the most prestigious family crests in the diaspora community. That specific ring, the one Mr. Takahashi wears, was commissioned in 1962 when he became a Japanese-American citizen. It was made by a master craftsman in Kyoto using gold from his family's ancestral home in Japan. It's been photographed, written about, displayed in museums. Anyone with even passing knowledge of Japanese-American business history would recognize it immediately." Maya felt her stomach drop even further. The ring wasn't just significant, it was famous, a symbol known throughout an entire community. Her ignorance was even more profound than she had realized. She had missed not just subtle cues, but glaring, obvious signs that screamed importance and heritage. "The worst part," James said, and Maya could hear the genuine anguish in his voice now, "is that I know why he came here tonight. Today is the anniversary of the day he opened his first business in this city, 78 years ago. He always marks it quietly, privately. He comes to this restaurant, sits at table 23 because it has a view of the garden that reminds him of his home in Japan, and he has a simple meal alone. It's his tradition, his way of remembering where he came from and honoring the journey. Tonight, on this anniversary, we turned him away." The tragedy of it crashed over Maya like a wave. She had not only humiliated a powerful man, she had ruined what was clearly a deeply personal ritual, a moment of reflection and memory on a day that held profound significance. She had taken something sacred and trampled it underfoot through her own blind assumptions and prejudice. "What's going to happen to the restaurant?" Maya asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. James looked toward the dining room where blissfully unaware customers continued their meals, where the staff moved efficiently between tables, where everything appeared normal and perfect on the surface. "I don't know," he admitted, and the uncertainty in his voice was somehow worse than anger would have been. "Mr. Takahashi has never been vindictive. He's never used his power to destroy people or businesses, even when he had every right to, but he also doesn't forget. And he doesn't accept excuses. The best case scenario is that he simply never comes back, never acknowledges this place exists, and we lose the prestige and protection that came with his patron. The worst case," he paused, his jaw working as he tried to find the words, "the worst case is that his family decides we've dishonored their patriarch beyond forgiveness and they choose not to renew our lease when it comes up in 6 months. 6 months. Maya had 6 months before her mistake could result in dozens of people losing their jobs, a legendary restaurant closing its doors forever, and a piece of the city's culinary history being erased, all because she had looked at an old man in a worn coat and decided in 7 seconds that he didn't belong. "You need to go home," James said finally, his voice heavy with exhaustion and defeat. "I need to call the owner, start preparing that incident report, and figure out if there's any possible way to salvage this situation. Tomorrow we'll deal with the consequences. Tonight I just need you out of my sight before I say something we'll both regret." Maya wanted to protest, wanted to stay and help somehow, but she recognized the dismissal for what it was. She had done enough damage for one night. She retrieved her bag from the staff room, moving through the familiar space like a ghost, seeing the concerned looks from the kitchen staff who had somehow already heard whispers of what had happened. News traveled fast in restaurants, especially catastrophic news. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Maya looked up and down the street, half hoping to catch a glimpse of Kenji Takahashi, to have one more chance to apologize, to make amends. But the sidewalks were empty except for the usual flow of city pedestrians, and he was long gone, disappeared into the urban landscape like a spirit returning to the shadows. Maya began walking, not toward the subway station that would take her home, but aimlessly, letting her feet carry her through streets she barely saw. Her mind kept returning to that moment, replaying it over and over like a cruel loop. The look on his face when she had told him he couldn't enter. Not anger, but that deep, weary sadness. The ring catching the light as he reached for his wallet, a detail she had noticed too late to matter. The quiet dignity with which he had absorbed the insult and walked away, refusing James's desperate attempts at reconciliation. Maya found herself in front of a 24-hour coffee shop 6 blocks from the restaurant, the kind of place that catered to insomniacs and night shift workers with its harsh, fluorescent lighting and cracked vinyl booths. She ordered coffee she didn't want and sat in the corner furthest from the window, pulling out her phone with trembling hands. If she was going to understand the magnitude of what she had done, she needed to know exactly who Kenji Takahashi was, beyond the fragments James had thrown at her in his anger. The search results were overwhelming. Page after page appeared, spanning decades of articles, interviews, photographs, and references. Maya started scrolling, and with each swipe, her sense of horror deepened. The first article was from a business journal, dated just 3 months earlier, titled "The Last of the Pioneers." Kenji Takahashi at 92. The photograph showed an elderly Japanese man in an impeccably tailored suit standing in front of a modern glass building, his expression serene, his hands clasped in front of him. On his right hand, clearly visible even in the photograph, was the ring. Maya clicked through to read the article. It painted a portrait of a man whose life story seemed almost impossible in its scope and drama. Born in Hiroshima in 1933, Kenji Takahashi had been 14 years old when the atomic bomb fell. He had survived, though his home and most of his extended family had not. In 1947, sponsored by a distant relative, he had immigrated to the United States with $8 in his pocket and a determination to build something meaningful from the ashes of his old life. The article detailed his early years in America, working as a dishwasher, a janitor, a warehouse loader, any job he could find, while teaching himself English at night and taking correspondence courses in business and engineering. In 1952, at the age of 19, he had saved enough to buy a small, failing grocery store in what was then an impoverished neighborhood. Through sheer work ethic and an intuitive understanding of the community's needs, he had turned it profitable within a year. But it was his move into real estate in the early 1960s that had truly established his legacy. The article explained how Takahashi had recognized the potential in neglected urban properties before anyone else, how he had bought buildings that others considered worthless and transformed them into thriving commercial space. What set him apart from other developers, the journalist noted, was his philosophy. He never displaced existing tenants, always maintained below-market rents for small businesses, and insisted on preserving the architectural character of the neighborhoods he developed. He built an empire not through ruthless acquisition, but through patient investment and genuine community care. Maya scrolled to another article, this one from a university magazine, featuring a commencement speech Takahashi had given at Columbia Business School 5 years earlier. The speech was titled "The Currency of Respect," and even reading it secondhand through a journalist's summary, Maya could feel its power. He had talked about his early years in America, about the casual racism and discrimination he had faced, about being denied service at restaurants, refused apartments, turned away from jobs despite his qualification. He had spoken about how those experiences had shaped his business philosophy, about his determination to create spaces where everyone would be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance or background. One quote was highlighted in bold text, and it hit Maya like a punch to the stomach. "I learned early that how a society treats its most vulnerable members is the true measure of its character. I decided then that any business I built would be judged not by its profits, but by whether it made the world a little more just, a little more kind. Money comes and goes, but the way you make people feel, that is your true legacy." She had made him feel unwelcome. She had made him feel judged and rejected in a restaurant that existed in a building he owned, in a neighborhood he had helped revitalize, in a city where he had spent nearly 80 years proving his worth over and over again. The irony was so bitter it made her want to scream. Maya kept reading, unable to stop now, even though each new piece of information was another weight added to her crushing sense of guilt. She found a profile from a Japanese American cultural magazine that focused on his role as a bridge between communities. It described his fluency in multiple languages, work funding cultural centers and scholarships, his quiet philanthropy that had put thousands of young people through college. There was a quote from a former scholarship recipient, now a successful architect, saying, "Mr. Takahashi didn't just give us money. He gave us his time, his wisdom, his belief in our potential. He treated us like family." Another article, this one from a local newspaper, focused on his personal life. He had been married for 63 years to his wife Yuki, who had passed away 2 years earlier. They had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. The article mentioned his well-known habits, his preference for simple clothing despite his wealth, his love of walking through the city rather than being driven, his tradition of eating at modest neighborhood restaurants where he could sit quietly and observe the flow of life around him. Maya's coffee had gone cold, forgotten on the chipped Formica table. She clicked on the image search results and found herself looking at decades of photographs. Young Kenji in the 1950s, standing proudly in front of his first grocery store, his face unlined but his eyes already carrying that deep, patient wisdom. Middle-aged Kenji in the 1970s, shaking hands with a mayor as he accepted an award for community development. Elderly Kenji in recent years, always dressed simply, always wearing that ring, always with that same expression of calm dignity. In one photograph from a charity gala 10 years earlier, Maya found an image that made her breath catch. Kenji stood with his late wife, both of them in elegant formal wear. Yuki wore a stunning kimono and Kenji was in a traditional black suit, but what caught Maya's attention was his expression as he looked at his wife. There was such tenderness, such deep love in his eyes that it transformed his weathered face into something beautiful. The caption read, Kenji and Yuki Takahashi at the Japanese-American Cultural Center Anniversary Gala. The couple donated $3 million to ensure the center's programs remain free for all community members. $3 million given away to help others. While he walked into restaurants wearing a worn wool coat because he saw no need for ostentation or display, Maya thought about her own closet at home, full of clothes she had bought to project success and style. Clothes that cost more than she could really afford on her waitress salary. She had judged this man for his modest appearance while he had quietly given away more money than she would earn in a lifetime. A new article caught her eye, this one from just last year. The Ring That Remembers. Kenji Takahashi's symbol of heritage and hope. Maya clicked on it with a sense of dread, already knowing this would be the worst one yet. The article was a deep dive into the history and significance of the Takahashi family ring, the very ring she had seen on his hand for those few crucial seconds in the restaurant entrance. The journalist explained that the ring had been commissioned in 1962, the year Takahashi became an American citizen, but it wasn't just a celebration of his new status. The article revealed that the gold used to create the ring had come from a source of profound personal significance. Before fleeing Hiroshima as a teenager, Kenji had managed to retrieve a few pieces of jewelry from the ruins of his family home. These pieces, all that remained of his parents, grandparents, and siblings who had perished, had traveled with him to America. For 15 years he had kept them, unable to wear them but unable to part with them. When he finally achieved citizenship and felt truly rooted in his new country, he had commissioned the ring as a way to honor both his heritage and his future. The gold was melted down from his family's jewelry, literally carrying the essence of his lost loved ones with him always. The crane in the family crest represented longevity and good fortune, while the wisteria blossoms symbolized humility and the beauty of endurance. The article quoted Takahashi directly. This ring is my family. It is everyone I lost and everyone I found. It is the past and the future. When I wear it, I carry my parents' dreams and my children's hopes on the same hand. It reminds me why I work, why I build, why I persist, not for myself, but for those who came before and those who will come after. Maya felt tears streaming down her face, hot and unchecked. She had seen that ring, that vessel of unspeakable loss and profound love, and she had registered it only as a piece of jewelry. Another detail to catalog in her assessment of whether this man belonged in her restaurant. She had looked at a symbol that represented the atomic bomb, survival, immigration, citizenship, family, loss, hope, and the entire sweep of a remarkable life, and she had missed all of it. She had seen without seeing, looked without understanding. The article continued with testimonies from various people in the Japanese-American community about what the ring meant to them. A museum curator explained that Takahashi had been asked repeatedly to donate or loan the ring to exhibitions, and he had always politely declined. It's not a museum piece, he had told her. It's a living thing. It needs to be worn to be part of life, not locked behind glass. A community leader described seeing the ring at important meetings and negotiations. When Mr. Takahashi places his hand on the table, and you see that ring, you understand you're dealing with someone who has earned every ounce of respect through lived experience. That ring has more moral authority than any title or position could ever confer. Maya closed her phone and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears and failing. The coffee shop around her buzzed with late-night activity, people coming and going, living their lives, unaware that in this corner booth a young woman was being crushed under the weight of her own prejudice and ignorance. She had always thought of herself as open-minded, progressive, someone who judged people by their character rather than surface details. But when tested, when the moment arrived, she had failed completely and revealed to herself exactly what she truly was: shallow, presumptuous, and blind to anything that didn't fit her narrow expectations. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Chloe, another waitress at Sakura Garden, and her closest friend on the staff. "Oh my God, Maya, what happened? Everyone is freaking out. James is in the office with the owner and I heard your name. Are you okay?" Maya stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "I made a terrible mistake. I don't know if okay is something I get to be right now. Single quotes. Chloe's response came immediately. "Where are you? I'm coming to find you." But Maya didn't want company. Didn't want comfort or reassurance. She needed to sit with this, to fully comprehend what she had done and what it meant. She turned her phone face down on the table and stared out the window at the city night. Somewhere out there, Kenji Takahashi was having his anniversary dinner, but not at his usual table with his usual view of the garden that reminded him of home. Instead, he was somewhere else, his tradition broken. His quiet ritual of remembrance disrupted by a young woman who thought she knew better, who thought she could determine a person's worth in 7 seconds. Across the city, in a neighborhood that bore little resemblance to the polished elegance of the restaurant district, Kenji Takahashi sat at a small table in a ramen shop that had been serving the community for 40 years. The shop was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 rows of tables, and the walls were covered with fading photographs of satisfied customers and yellowed newspaper clippings. The air was thick with the rich aroma of pork bone broth and garlic, and the sound of boiling water and sizzling ingredients created a comfortable symphony of kitchen chaos. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Hiroko, had recognized Kenji the moment he walked through the door. Her eyes had widened and she had started to bow deeply, but he had raised a hand gently to stop her. "Just a bowl of your shoyu ramen, please," he had said quietly. "And some peace." Hiroko had understood immediately. She had seated him at the table in the back corner, the one usually reserved for employees taking their breaks, where he could eat without being stared at or interrupted. Now she brought the ramen herself, setting it down with careful reverence, the bowl nearly overflowing with noodles, soft-boiled eggs, bamboo shoots, and sliced pork. The broth was dark and glossy, and steam rose from it in hypnotic curls. "Thank you," Kenji said, and Hiroko saw the weariness in his eyes. The particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical tiredness and everything to do with the weight of accumulated years and disappointments. "Would you like anything else, Mr. Takahashi?" she asked soft. "Some tea, perhaps?" He shook his head gently. "This is perfect, just as I remember it." Hiroko bowed and withdrew, but not before touching his shoulder briefly in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. Kenji appreciated it more than he could express. This place, this modest ramen shop with its cracked linoleum floors and mismatched chairs, felt more like home than the 5-star restaurants where he was occasionally obligated to dine for business purposes. He broke apart his wooden chopsticks and lifted a bundle of noodles to his mouth. The flavor was exactly as it had been for decades, simple and honest, requiring no pretense or performance. As he ate slowly, methodically, his mind drifted not to the incident at Sakura Garden, which had already been filed away in the vast catalog of minor disappointments that comprised any long life, but to the anniversary he was marking. 78 years ago today, he had opened his first business in America. Not the grocery store that most people knew about, but something smaller, more humble, and more significant. It had been a shoe repair shop, a tiny storefront no bigger than a closet, where he had spent 80-hour days resolving, stitching, and polishing the worn shoes of working people who couldn't afford to buy new ones. He'd been 19 years old, barely spoke English, and possessed nothing but a set of cobbler's tools he had purchased secondhand, and the lessons in craftsmanship his grandfather had taught him during childhood summers in Hiroshima before the world had turned to ash. The shop had lasted only 2 years before he had saved enough to move into the grocery business, but those 2 years had taught him everything he needed to know about America and about himself. He had learned that people, regardless of their background or circumstances, wanted the same fundamental things: to be treated with respect, to have their work valued, to feel that their struggles mattered. He had learned that there was dignity in all honest labor, whether you were repairing shoes or building skyscrapers, and he had learned that success was not measured by how high you climbed, but by how many people you helped climb with you. Kenji thought about the young waitress at Sakura Garden, remembering her face with perfect clarity despite the brevity of their interaction. She had been nervous, he had seen that immediately, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. She had been trying to do her job as she understood it, trying to maintain standards and protect the restaurant's reputation. In her position, at her age, with her limited experience, she had made the only decision that seemed reasonable to her. He couldn't fault her for that. Not really. What saddened him was not the personal slight, which he had experienced countless times before, and would doubtless experience again before his life was through, but what it represented about how the world still worked. Appearance still mattered more than substance for so many people. The surface was still judged more carefully than the depths. A man in an expensive suit would be welcomed everywhere, while that same man in work clothes would be turned away, regardless of the content of his character or the size of his heart. He had thought, perhaps naively, that the world had progressed more than it evidently had. He had thought that his own visibility, his public speeches and interviews and philanthropic work might have shifted the needle slightly toward a society that looked beyond the superficial. But here was evidence that the old prejudices remained, just dressed up in new language about dress codes and standards and appropriate attire. The worst part, and Kenji felt this as a physical ache in his chest, was knowing that his own grandson would face similar judgments. Hideki was 24 years old, brilliant and creative, but he had chosen to pursue art rather than business. business. He wore paint-stained clothes and kept his hair long and refused to conform to corporate expectations of presentation. How many doors would be closed to him? How many opportunities lost because people like that young waitress made their judgments in 7 seconds? Kenji finished his ramen and set down his chopsticks with a soft click against the ceramic bowl. The ring on his finger caught the light from the fluorescent bulbs overhead, and he found himself, as he often did, turning it slowly on his finger, feeling its familiar weight. He thought about his mother, who had worn earrings made from the same gold that now formed this ring. She had been a woman of extraordinary grace who had taught him that true elegance was not about what you wore, but how you treated others. She had died in the bombing, along with his father and 2 younger sisters, but her lessons had survived, transmitted through this ring like some kind of spiritual inheritance. If she could see him now, what would she say about tonight's event? Kenji smiled slightly, already knowing the answer. She would tell him to forgive, as she had always forgiven. She would remind him that young people make mistakes because they don't yet have the wisdom that comes only from years of living and learning. She would say that this was a teaching moment, not a punishing moment, and that how he responded would matter more than what had happened. Hiroko approached his table quietly, carrying a small cup of green tea that he hadn't ordered but that she had brought anyway, because she knew it was his habit to end a meal with tea. She set it down and then, unexpectedly, sat down across from him, something she would never normally do with a customer, even one she had known for decades. "Forgive me for being presumptuous, Mr. Takahashi," she said in Japanese, switching to their shared language as a gesture of intimacy and respect. "But I can see that something has troubled you tonight. If you wish to speak of it, I will listen. If you wish for silence, I will respect that as well." Kenji looked at her weathered face, so similar to his own in its map of years and experience, and felt a wave of gratitude for this simple, genuine offer of human connection. "I went to Sakura Garden tonight," he said, also in Japanese, "for my anniversary dinner. They turned me away at the door, said I wasn't dressed appropriately." Hiroko's expression shifted through surprise to anger to understanding in the space of a few seconds. "The young woman at the door," she asked, "did she know who you are?" Kenji shook his head. She did not. And when the manager told her, she looked as though she wished the earth would swallow her whole. Hiroko made a soft sound of sympathy. "For her or for you?" "Both, I think," Kenji replied. "The error was hers, but the suffering will be hers as well. By now she will have learned who I am, will have understood the significance of her mistake. She will be drowning in regret and fear, worrying about her job, her future, her reputation. That is a heavy burden for someone so young to carry." "But she wronged you," Hiroko protested gently. "On a day that matters to you, she caused you pain and denied you the peace you sought. Surely she must face consequences for that." Kenji sipped his tea, letting its warmth spread through him before responding. "When I was young, not much older than that waitress, I was refused service at a restaurant in this very neighborhood. The owner told me, in words I will never forget, that he didn't serve Japs, that I should go back to where I came from. I was so angry, so hurt, so filled with righteous fury that I wanted to burn his establishment to the ground. Instead, I went home and I cried, and then I made a promise to myself." He paused, looking down at his ring. "I promised that when I had power, when I had influence, I would never wield it as a weapon. I would never use my position to punish people for their mistakes or their ignorance. I would use it only to educate, to elevate, to create opportunities for others to learn and grow." "So what will you do?" Hiroko asked. The silence stretched between them, comfortable and contempt. Finally, Kenji set down his teacup with careful precision. "I will do what my mother would have done. I will find a way to turn this into something meaningful, something that teaches rather than destroys. But first, I need to understand the full picture. Who is this young woman? What brought her to that moment? What does she need to learn? And how can I help her learn it?" Hiroko smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of her eyes. "This is why people respect you, Mr. Takahashi. Not because of your wealth or your buildings, but because of your heart." She stood up, collecting his empty bowl. "Your meal tonight is my gift to you. A proper anniversary dinner with no judgments, no dress codes, only good food and old friendship." Kenji tried to protest, but Hiroko waved him off. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his tea. He sat in that small ramen shop for another hour, watching the other customers come and go, listening to the sounds of the city filtering through the walls and contemplating his next move. The young waitress had made a mistake, yes, but mistakes were the raw material from which wisdom was forged. The question was not whether she would be punished, but whether she would be given the chance to grow. Maya didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small studio apartment, staring at the ceiling as traffic sounds filtered through the thin walls and the hours crawled past with excruciating slowness. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Kenji Takahashi's face, that expression of weary sadness, the ring on his finger catching the light. She had replayed the scene so many times in her mind that it had taken on the quality of a nightmare, each detail sharp and inescapable. At 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and made coffee, sitting at her tiny kitchen table with her laptop open. She read everything she could find about Kenji Takahashi, about his businesses, his philosophy, his life story. With each article, each interview, each photograph, the weight of her mistake grew heavier. This wasn't just a powerful man she had insulted. This was a man who had dedicated his entire life to building a more just an equitable world, and she had denied him basic dignity based on the most superficial of judgments. Her phone buzzed at 6:30, an unknown number. Maya stared at it for several rings before answering, her heart pounding. Hello? Miss Chun, this is Eleanor Yamamoto. I'm calling from Takahashi Enterprises Corporate Communications Department. The voice was professional, clipped, revealing nothing. Mr. Takahashi has requested a meeting with you this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Are you available? Maya's mouth went dry. A meeting with him. Directly. She had expected many things: termination, legal action, professional blacklisting, but not this. Not a personal audience with the man she had wronged. Yes, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'm available. I'll be there. Where should I come? Eleanor provided an address in downtown. Not the imposing headquarters of Takahashi Enterprises, but a smaller building that Maya recognized as the location of the company's community outreach division. The meeting will be informal, Eleanor continued, her tone softening slightly. Mr. Takahashi simply wishes to speak with you. Please come as you are. There's no need for formal attire. The last sentence felt loaded with unintended irony, and Maya wondered if Eleanor knew the full details of what had happened or if she was simply following instructions. Thank you, Maya said. I'll be there. Please tell Mr. Takahashi that I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to speak with him. The call ended and Maya sat motionless, staring at her phone. She had 7.5 hours to prepare for a conversation that could determine the entire trajectory of her future. She had no idea what Kenji Takahashi wanted to say to her, whether this was an opportunity for her to apologize directly or a formal prelude to her professional destruction. All she knew was that she would face it, whatever it was, because it was the very least she owed him. Maya spent the morning crafting and discarding apologies, trying to find words adequate to express her remorse. Everything she wrote sounded hollow, performative, insufficient. How did you apologize for revealing your own prejudice and ignorance? How did you make amends for disrupting someone's sacred ritual, for disrespecting a lifetime of dignity and accomplishment? She eventually gave up on preparing a speech and decided she would simply speak from her heart, let her genuine remorse show through whatever imperfect words emerged. She arrived at the community outreach building 20 minutes early, her stomach churning with anxiety. The building was modest, a restored brownstone that had been converted into offices and meeting spaces. The lobby was decorated with photographs documenting various community projects, playgrounds built, schools renovated, scholarships. In almost every photograph she could spot Kenji Takahashi, often in the background, always dressed simply, always with that same expression of quiet purpose. Eleanor Yamamoto met her in the lobby, a woman in her 40s wearing a professional but approachable outfit, her expression neutral but not unkind. Miss Chun, thank you for coming. Please follow me. They walked through a hallway lined with more photographs and framed newspaper articles, a visual history of decades of community investment. Eleanor stopped in front of a door and knocked gently before opening it. Mr. Takahashi, Miss Chun is here. Thank you, Eleanor. Please come in, Miss Chun. The voice was the same one Maya remembered from the restaurant, low and calm, carrying that careful precision of someone speaking in a second language they had long since mastered. Eleanor stepped aside and Maya entered the room, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The office was small and unpretentious, with a simple wooden desk, 2 comfortable chairs, and walls lined with bookshelves. Large windows overlooked a small garden courtyard below. Kenji Takahashi sat behind the desk and he stood as she entered, a gesture of courtesy that made Maya feel even worse. He was dressed, as she had seen him the night before, in simple clothing, dark trousers and a gray cardigan over a white shirt. The ring gleamed on his right hand. Please, sit, he said, gesturing to one of the chairs across from his desk. Maya sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. Kenji returned to his seat and regarded her with those same dark, penetrating eyes. The silence stretched for several long seconds, and Maya felt herself drowning in it. Mr. Takahashi, she began, her voice breaking slightly. I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened last night. There is no excuse for my behavior, no justification for the way I treated. I made a judgment based solely on appearance, and in doing so, I violated everything I thought I believed about fairness and respect. I have spent the night reading about your life, your work, your philosophy, and I understand now the full magnitude of my mistake. Not just that I failed to recognize who you were, but that I failed to treat you with the basic dignity that every human being deserves, regardless of who they are. The words tumbled out in a rush, and when she finished, she looked down at her hands, unable to meet his eyes. She felt tears threatening and fought them back. She would not make this about her pain, her guilt. This was about him and what he had experienced. Kenji was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. Miss Chun, do you know why I asked you here today? Maya shook her head, still looking down. I asked you here because I wanted to understand who you are. Not the waitress who made a mistake, but the person behind that moment. Tell me about yourself. Where are you from? What brought you to work at Sakura Garden? What are your dreams? The questions caught Maya completely off guard. She had expected anger, accusations, demands for further apologies. She hadn't expected genuine curiosity. Slowly, haltingly, she began to talk. She told him about growing up in the city. The daughter of immigrants from Taiwan who had worked multiple jobs to give her opportunities they had never had. She told him about her love of hospitality, her dream of one day opening her own restaurant where everyone would feel welcome regardless of their background or circumstances. She told him about the crushing weight of student loans, about taking the job at Sakura Garden because it was prestigious and paid well, about how somewhere along the way she had absorbed the restaurant's culture of exclusivity without questioning it. As she spoke, Kenji listened with complete attention, occasionally nodding but never interrupting. When she finally fell silent, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Your dream of a restaurant where everyone feels welcome," he said finally. "That is a good dream, an important dream. But tell me, Miss Chun, how can you create such a place if you yourself make judgments about who belongs and who doesn't?" Maya felt the question land like a physical blow because it cut straight to the heart of her hypocrisy. "I can't," she whispered. "That's what I realized last night. I can't create that kind of space because I'm part of the problem. I thought I was better than that. Thought I was different, but when the moment came, I failed completely." "Yes, you did," Kenji said. And there was no cruelty in his voice, only simple truth. "You failed. But failure is not the end of a story, Miss Chun. It is merely a chapter. The question is what comes next. What you learn, how you grow." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk, the ring visible and somehow accusatory even though his tone remained gentle. "When I was a young man, not much older than you, I was turned away from a restaurant because of my race. The owner used a word I will not repeat, told me to go back where I came from. I was filled with rage and hurt and a desire for revenge. I wanted to destroy him, to make him pay for the humiliation I felt." "What did you do?" Maya asked quietly. Kenji smiled slightly, a sad expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I did nothing. I went home and I cried and I made a promise to myself that when I had power, I would never use it to hurt others the way I had been hurt. I would use it only to create opportunities, to educate, to heal. That promise has guided every decision I have made for the past 78 years. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the courtyard garden below. "Last night was the anniversary of the day I opened my first business in America. It has become my tradition to mark that day quietly, privately, with a simple meal at a place that reminds me of my heritage. You disrupted that tradition, Miss Chun, and I will not pretend that didn't cause me pain. But your mistake also created an opportunity. A teaching moment, not just for you, but for many others." Maya stood as well, unable to remain seated while he was standing. "Mr. Takahashi, please tell me what I can do to make this right. I'll do anything, anything at all." Kenji turned from the window to face her directly. "What happened last night has already set certain events in motion. Takahashi Enterprises has informed Sakura Garden that we will not be renewing the building lease when it expires in 6 months. The restaurant will need to relocate or close." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Her mistake wasn't just going to cost her job, it was going to cost everyone their jobs. Dozens of people would suffer because of her 7-second judgment. "But," Kenji continued, raising a hand to forestall her protest, "that decision is not a punishment. It is a business decision based on a fundamental misalignment of value. A restaurant that claims to celebrate Japanese culture while treating people according to their appearance rather than their character is not a business we wish to support. The space in that building will not remain empty," Kenji continued, returning to his desk and pulling out a thick folder that he placed between them. "For several years I have been working on a project close to my heart, a new kind of restaurant and community space, one that embodies the values I have tried to live by throughout my life. I call it the Open Table. The concept is simple, but I believe revolutionary. It'll be a place where anyone can come, regardless of their economic status, their appearance, their background. There will be no dress code, no judgment at the door, no invisible barriers that tell people they don't belong." He opened the folder, revealing architectural drawings, business plans, photographs of potential staff and partners. Maya leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents with growing amazement. The plans showed a beautiful space that somehow managed to be both elegant and welcoming, with an open kitchen, communal tables mixed with private booths, and large windows that would flood the dining room with natural light. There were details about a sliding scale pricing system where customers would pay what they could afford, with those who had more subsidizing those who had less. There were plans for cooking classes, cultural events, and community gathering. "This is incredible," Maya breathed, momentarily forgetting her fear and guilt in the face of such an ambitious vision. "But what does this have to do with me? Why are you showing me this?" Kenji closed the folder and looked at her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and transparent. "Because, Miss Chun, I believe in second chances. I believe that the measure of a person is not their worst moment, but what they do after that moment. You made a terrible mistake last night, one that revealed prejudices you didn't know you carried. But your response to discovering that mistake tells me something important about your character." He pulled out his phone and turned it toward her. On the screen was a social media post from late last night, written by someone named Chloe Martinez. Maya recognized it immediately as her friend's account. The post read, "Tonight I watched someone I respect realize they'd made a mistake that hurt another person. And instead of making excuses or deflecting blame, she owned it completely. Real growth is painful. Real change requires us to confront the worst parts of ourselves. I'm proud to know someone willing to do that hard work even when it costs her everything." Chloe had posted that about her, defending her even as Maya's world was collapsing. The gesture brought fresh tears to Maya's eyes. Your friend wrote that after speaking with you last night, Kenji said. She told me when my assistant contacted her for background on the incident that you spent hours researching me, reading about my life and work, not to prepare a defense but to understand the depth of your mistake. She said you were destroyed by remorse, not for getting caught but for causing pain. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I keep thinking about your anniversary dinner, about how you must have been looking forward to that quiet moment of reflection, and I ruined it with my ignorance and prejudice. I can't take it back, can't undo it, and that's what makes it so unbearable. No, you cannot take it back, Kenji agreed, but you can use it as the foundation for something better. He tapped the folder in front of him. The open table needs a man, someone who will not only oversee the daily operations but embody its values, someone who has learned through painful experience why those values matter. I believe you could be that person, Miss Chun, but only if you are willing to do the difficult work of examining your own biases and growing beyond them. Maya stared at him in disbelief. You're offering me a job? After what I did? You want me to manage your restaurant? The words sounded absurd even as she spoke them. Kenji shook his head slightly, correcting her. I am not offering you a job. I am offering you an opportunity to transform your mistake into meaning, your guilt into growth. But this will not be easy. You will spend the next 6 months in intensive training. You will work with our cultural sensitivity experts, our community outreach team, our diversity and inclusion consultants. You will visit every neighborhood in this city, eat at every type of restaurant, speak with people from backgrounds completely different from your own. You will learn to see beyond surfaces, to recognize the inherent worth and dignity in every person you encounter. He stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down a slim volume with a worn cover. This is a journal my wife kept during our first years in America. She documented every slight, every moment of discrimination, every time we were made to feel like outsiders in the country we had chosen as our home. He handed the book to Maya, who took it with trembling hand. I want you to read this, to understand not intellectually but emotionally what it feels like to be on the receiving end of judgment and exclusion. Only then can you truly create a space where everyone feels they belong. Maya opened the journal to a random page and saw elegant handwriting in both Japanese and English, describing an incident where Yuki Takahashi had been followed around a department store by security guards who assumed she was there to shoplift. The pain and humiliation in those words was palpable, and Maya felt her own shame deepen. I'll read it, she promised. I'll read every word and I'll learn from it. I swear to you, Mr. Takahashi, I will not waste this chance you're giving. There's one more condition, Kenji said, returning to his seat. When the open table opens, you will tell your story. Publicly. You will stand in front of our community and explain what happened at Sakura Garden, what you learned from it, and why this restaurant exists. You will make yourself vulnerable, subject yourself to judgment, and accept whatever consequences come from that honesty. Can you do that? The thought terrified Maya more than anything else he had asked. To admit her prejudice publicly, to become a cautionary tale, to open herself up to the criticism and condemnation she undoubtedly deserved, felt like stepping off a cliff with no certainty of what lay below. But she thought about Kenji Takahashi, who had shared his own painful stories of discrimination in speeches and interviews, who had made himself vulnerable in service of education and change. If he could do that after everything he had survived, how could she refuse? Yes, Maya said, her voice stronger now. I can do that. I will do that. Because if my mistake can prevent even one other person from making the same error, if my shame can create even a small amount of positive change, then it will have been worth it. Kenji smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face and made his eyes crinkle with warmth. Good, Miss Chun. Then we have an agreement. You will begin your training next week. Eleanor will coordinate the details and connect you with the various teams and experts you'll be working with. Your salary during this training period will match what you were making at Sakura Garden, so you need not worry about finances while you learn. He stood and extended his hand across the desk. Maya stood as well and took it, feeling the strength in his grip and the weight of the ring against her palm. As their hands clasped, she felt something shift inside her, a sense that her life had just pivoted in a direction she could never have anticipated. The worst moment of her existence was becoming a doorway to something she couldn't yet fully comprehend, but that felt important and meaningful in ways her previous work never had. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing something in me worth salvaging, for giving me a chance I don't deserve but will spend every day trying to earn. Kenji's expression became serious again. You do deserve it, Miss Chun, not because of who you were, but because of who you were choosing to become. That choice, that commitment to growth and change is what makes you worthy of this opportunity. Do not waste it. He released her hand and walked her to the door. Before opening it, he paused and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. My wife, before she passed, she used to say that the universe gives us exactly the lessons we need, exactly when we need them, even if we don't recognize them as gifts at the time. Last night was a lesson for both of us. For you, a confrontation with your own unconscious biases. For me, a reminder that the work of building a more just and compassionate world is never finished, that there are always more people who need to learn and grow. What lesson did you need? Maya asked softly. Kenji smiled that sad smile again. I needed to remember why I do this work, why I continue to fight for change even at my age, even after everything I've accomplished. I needed to meet someone like you, someone genuinely remorseful and eager to grow, to remind me that people can change, that mistakes can become catalysts for transformation. You reminded me that hope is justified. He opened the door, and Eleanor was waiting outside, her expression now warm and welcoming. Miss Chun, Eleanor said, I've prepared some initial materials for you to review. Shall we go over the training schedule? Maya nodded, but before leaving she turned back to Kenji one more time. Mr. Takahashi, I promise you won't regret this. I promise I will become someone who makes you proud. Kenji's eyes held hers for a long moment. I believe you will, Miss Chun. Now go begin the work. The path ahead will be difficult, but I suspect you will find it is also the most rewarding thing you have ever done. Maya left his office and followed Eleanor down the hallway, her mind reeling with everything that had just happened. She had entered that building expecting punishment, perhaps even legal consequences or professional ruin. Instead, she had been offered redemption, a chance to transform her worst moment into her greatest opportunity for growth. As they settled into a conference room and Eleanor began spreading out documents detailing the training program, the community partnerships, the cultural education courses, and the timeline leading to the Open Table's opening, Maya felt something she hadn't felt since the moment she had turned Kenji Takahashi away at the door of Sakura Garden. She felt hope. Not the shallow, easy hope of someone who had escaped consequences, but the deeper, more meaningful hope that comes from being given a genuine chance to become better, to learn from failure, and to contribute to something larger than oneself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. How did it go? Are you okay? Call me the second you can. Maya smiled and typed back a response. Better than I could have imagined. So much better. I'll call you tonight and explain everything. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. The 6 months that followed were the most challenging and transformative of Maya's life. The training program Kenji had designed was not a simple course in restaurant management or hospitality best practices. It was a comprehensive dismantling and rebuilding of her entire worldview. A systematic examination of every assumption she had ever made about people, worth, and belonging. Her first assignment came from Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, a sociologist who specialized in implicit bias and systemic discrimination. Dr. Okonkwo was a tall woman with an infectious laugh and an uncompromising commitment to truth. Their first session took place not in an office, but on a street corner in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. Stand here for 2 hours, Doctor, Okonkwo instructed, handing Maya a clipboard and pen. Count how many people make eye contact with well-dressed pedestrians versus those who appear homeless or working class. Note the differences in how people move around them, how much space they give them, whether they acknowledge their existence at all. Maya spent those 2 hours witnessing a masterclass in unconscious dehumanization. She watched as shoppers smiled and nodded at people in expensive clothing while literally stepping into traffic to avoid someone in worn work boots. She saw security guards trail a young black man in a hoodie while ignoring a white teenager in similar attire. She observed doormen holding doors for some people while letting them swing closed in front of others based solely on appearance cues that took milliseconds to process. By the end of the 2 hours, Maya had filled 3 pages with observations and her hands were shaking. What you just witnessed, Doctor, Okonkwo said as they walked to a nearby cafe, happens thousands of times a day in every city in the world. Most people are completely unaware they're doing it. They're not consciously cruel or discriminatory. They're operating on autopilot, using mental shortcuts developed over a lifetime of socialization. Your job is to become aware of those shortcuts in yourself and actively work to override them. Over the following weeks, Maya engaged in exercises that forced her to confront her own biases in increasingly uncomfortable ways. She took online assessments that measured implicit associations and discovered she held unconscious preferences she would have sworn she didn't have. She participated in role-playing scenarios where she experienced what it felt like to be excluded, judged, and dismissed based on arbitrary characteristics. She watched films and documentaries about discrimination throughout history, seeing the through line from historic injustices to present-day microaggressions. The most powerful part of her training came from the community immersion program. Eleanor connected Maya with families and individuals from dozens of different backgrounds, and Maya spent time in their home, sharing meals, hearing their stories, learning about their experiences, navigating a world that didn't always see their full humanity. She met an elderly Vietnamese man who had been a doctor in his home country but worked as a janitor in America because his credentials weren't recognized. She met a young transgender woman who described being denied service at restaurants because staff decided her appearance made other customers uncomfortable. She met a Syrian refugee family who spoke 5 languages fluently but were treated as though they were ignorant because of their accents. Each story was a mirror reflecting back some aspect of her own behavior, some moment when she had made similar judgments, even if she hadn't acted on them as overtly as she had with Kenji Takahashi. Maya filled journal after journal with reflections, questions, realizations, and commitments to do better. She was reading Yuki Takahashi's journal as well, working through it slowly, letting each entry sink in before moving to the next. The cumulative weight of all that witnessed and experienced discrimination was crushing, but it was also clarifying. She began to understand that what had happened at Sakura Garden wasn't an aberration or a one-time mistake. It was a symptom of a much larger system of judgment and exclusion that she had been participating in her entire life without recognizing. Throughout this process, Kenji remained a distant but constant presence. He didn't oversee her training directly, but Maya would occasionally see him at the community center, speaking quietly with staff or sitting in on planning meetings for the open table. Once, about 3 months into her training, she encountered him in the building's small library where she had gone to study case histories of successful community restaurants. He was sitting in a corner reading, still wearing his simple clothes, still bearing that air of quiet dignity that she now recognized as the mark of someone who had nothing to prove. "May I join you, Mr. Takahashi?" Maya asked, hesitating in the doorway. Kenji looked up from his book and gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course, Miss Chun. How is your training progressing?" Maya sat down, setting her own stack of books on the table between them. "It's harder than I expected," she admitted. "Not the intellectual part, that's challenging, but manageable. It's the emotional part, confronting how much I didn't see, how many people I hurt or dismissed without even realizing it. Some days I feel like I'm drowning in guilt and shame." Kenji set down his book, a biography of someone Maya didn't recognize, and gave her his full attention. "That drowning feeling is important," he said gently. "It means you're truly understanding, not just intellectually, but in your heart and bones, the impact of the judgments we make. But you cannot stay in that place of drowning, Miss Chun. Guilt and shame are useful emotions only if they propel you toward change. If they become ends in themselves, they are merely self-indulgent." The words were frank but not unkind, and Maya recognized the wisdom in them. "You're right," she said. "I've been so focused on how terrible I feel that I haven't been thinking enough about how to ensure I never make anyone else feel that way. How do you do it? How do you carry the knowledge of all the injustice in the world without becoming paralyzed by it?" Kenji was quiet for a moment, his fingers unconsciously turning the ring on his right hand. "When I was young, just after the war, I was angry all the time," he said finally. "Angry at the Americans who dropped the bomb, angry at the Japanese military leaders whose choices led to that moment, angry at the universe for the unfairness of it all. That anger was like acid, eating away at me from the inside. My mother, before she died, she told me something I have never forgotten. She said that anger is like carrying a hot coal, intending to throw it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." He looked at Maya with those dark, penetrating eyes. "So I made a choice. Instead of carrying anger, I would carry purpose. Every building I constructed, every business I supported, every person I helped, these were acts of defiance against the forces of destruction and discrimination I had experienced. I could not undo the past, could not bring back my family or erase the scars of war, but I could build something better, something that honored their memory by creating the kind of world they would have wanted to live in." Maya felt tears prickling her eyes. "That's what the open table is. It's not just a restaurant. It's a statement about the world you want to create." Kenji nodded slowly. "Every meal served, there will be an act of resistance against the judgment and exclusion that diminishes us all. Every person who walks through those doors and feels welcomed will be proof that a different way is possible. And you, Miss Chun, will be the living embodiment of the restaurant's core principle that people can change, can grow beyond their worst moments, can become agents of healing rather than harm." The weight of that responsibility settled on Maya's shoulders, heavy but no longer crushing. She thought about the person she had been 6 months ago, confident in her judgments, certain of her ability to assess people's worth in seconds. That person seemed like a stranger now, someone she barely recognized. In her place was emerging someone more uncertain, but also more humble, more aware of her own limitations and biases, more committed to seeing the full humanity in every person she encountered. "I won't let you down," Maya said quietly. Kenji smiled, that warm expression that transformed his weathered face. "You cannot let me down, Miss Chun, because this work is not for me. It is for yourself, for your community, for everyone who will walk through those doors seeking not just food, but recognition, dignity, respect. Do the work for them, and you will never fail." As the 6-month mark approached, the pace of preparation intensified. The space that had housed Sakura Garden was undergoing a complete transformation. Maya was involved in every decision, from the design of the menu, to the training of the staff, to the creation of protocols that would ensure no one was ever made to feel unwelcome. The sliding scale payment system required careful implementation, finding ways to let people pay what they could afford without shame or stigma. They developed a system of tokens, colored discs, that corresponded to different price points, but that would be indistinguishable to other diners, ensuring privacy and dignity. The staff Kenji assembled for the open table were as diverse as the city itself. People from dozens of countries and backgrounds, many of whom had their own stories of discrimination and exclusion. Maya spent countless hours training alongside them, learning not just restaurant operations, but the deeper philosophy that would guide every interaction. They practiced scenarios, role-played difficult situations, committed to a set of core principles that would govern the space. No judgment based on appearance, no assumptions about people's circumstance, no hierarchy of worth. Everyone who entered would be treated with the same respect and care, whether they were paying full price or nothing at all. News of the open table's opening began to spread through the community. generating both excitement and skepticism. Some praised Kenji's vision and his willingness to challenge the traditional restaurant model. Others questioned whether such a concept could be financially sustainable, whether it would attract the wrong element, whether it would devalue the dining experience by removing exclusivity. Maya read the comments and criticisms online and recognized her own former thinking in many of them. The assumption that value was somehow tied to exclusivity, that opening doors to everyone would somehow diminish rather than enhance the experience. 2 weeks before the scheduled opening, Maya received an unexpected visitor at the community center. James, her former manager from Sakura Garden, appeared at her office door looking uncomfortable and uncertain. He had aged in the past months, new lines around his eyes, his silver hair more pronounced. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Maya gestured to a chair, her heart rate picking up. She hadn't seen or spoken to James since that catastrophic night. "Of course, please sit. What brings you here?" James sat down heavily, his hands clasped between his knees. "Sakura Garden closed last week," he said without preamble. "The owners tried to relocate, but without the Takahashi connection, and with the story of what happened spreading through the industry, they couldn't secure adequate financing. 73 people lost their jobs." The number hit Maya like a physical blow. 73 people. Servers, cooks, dishwashers, hosts, managers. People with families, with rent to pay, with dreams and responsibilities, all unemployed because of a chain of events that had started with her 7-second judgment. The guilt she had been working so hard to transform into purpose came rushing back, threatening to drown her all over again. "I know what you're thinking," James said, looking at her with an expression that held no anger, only weariness. "You're thinking this is your fault, that all those people are suffering because of what you did that night. And you're partly right, but you're also wrong." Maya forced herself to meet his eyes. "How am I wrong?" 73 people, James. 73 lives disrupted because I was too ignorant and prejudiced to see past an old man's coat. James leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "I've spent the last 6 months doing my own reckoning, Maya. When you turned Mr. Takahashi away, you were following protocols and standards that I had trained you to follow. You were enforcing a dress code that I had helped create and maintain. You were making judgments about who belonged in our space, based on criteria that the entire management team had agreed upon. Yes, you made the initial error, but I confirmed it. I backed you up. I didn't recognize him either until I saw his identification. We were all complicit in a system that valued appearance over humanity." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph of the Sakura Garden staff gathered outside the closed restaurant on their final day. Maya recognized faces. People she had worked alongside for years, their expressions a mixture of sadness and uncertainty. "After we closed, I started calling other restaurants, trying to help place people in new positions," he continued. "And I discovered something interesting. Every single one of them, when I explained what happened, asked the same question. They asked if I had learned anything from the experience, if I understood now why it was wrong, if I would do things differently." "What did you tell them?" Maya asked softly. James met her eyes steadily. "I told them the truth, that I had been so focused on maintaining standards and protecting the restaurant's reputation that I'd forgotten the most basic standard of all, treating every human being with respect and dignity regardless of their appearance. I told them that I had helped create a culture of exclusivity that was fundamentally incompatible with genuine hospitality, and I told them that if I ever had the chance to manage another restaurant, I would build it on completely different principles." He paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "That's why I'm here, Maya. I heard about the open table, about what Mr. Takahashi is building, and about your role in it. I came to ask if you might need an assistant manager, someone who understands high-end restaurant operations, but who also understands the cost of valuing image over substance. I know I have no right to ask given my role in what happened, but I want to be part of creating something better." Maya was stunned into momentary silence. James had been her boss, her mentor in many ways, someone she had looked up to and tried to emulate. The idea of him coming to her asking to work under her leadership represented a complete inversion of their previous dynamic. But more than that, it represented something she had learned over the past 6 months, that growth and change were possible at any age, that mistakes could become catalysts for transformation, not just for her, but for everyone touched by them. "I can't make that decision alone," Maya said finally. "Mr. Takahashi and the hiring committee would need to meet with you, hear your story, understand your commitment to our principles. But I can tell you that the open table is exactly what you described, a space built on different principles. If you're serious about doing this work, about unlearning old patterns and embracing a new approach, then I would be honored to have you as part of the team." James's eyes glistened with unexpected emotion. "Thank you, Maya. Thank you for not dismissing me out of hand, for giving me the same chance at redemption that Mr. Takahashi gave. I promise I won't waste it." They talked for another hour, James sharing his own journey of reflection and learning over the past months. He had read extensively about bias and discrimination, had attended workshops on inclusive hospitality, had done his own version of the work Maya had been doing. He understood that this wasn't about simply getting another job, but about fundamentally changing his approach to his profession and to people. After James left, Maya sat in her office staring at the photograph he had shared with her. 73 faces, 73 stories, 73 lives affected by what had happened. But as she studied the image more carefully, she noticed something. Several of the people in the photograph were smiling, not sad smiles but genuine expressions of something that looked almost like relief. She recognized Chloe in the front row, her arm around another server, both of them looking directly at the camera with expressions that seemed to say this is an ending but also a beginning. Maya pulled out her phone and called Chloe, something she'd been doing regularly throughout her training. Her friend answered on the second ring. "Maya, how are you? How's the prep for opening going?" "It's intense," Maya admitted. "And I just had an interesting visit from James. Did you know he was coming?" Chloe laughed, a warm, knowing sound. "I might have mentioned to him that the open table was hiring. Several of us from the old place have been talking, actually. A lot of people are interested in what you're building there. Not everyone. Some of the staff are bitter about losing their jobs and blame you entirely. But more than you might think have been doing their own reflection about the culture we were all part of." Over the next week, Maya conducted interviews with former Sakura Garden employees who wanted to join the open table team. Each conversation was an opportunity to assess not just their skills, but their commitment to the restaurant's core values. Some were hired immediately, people who demonstrated genuine understanding and growth. Others were gently turned away, not ready yet for the kind of radical hospitality the space would require. The final team of 35 people was a mixture of former Sakura Garden staff and new hires from diverse backgrounds, united by a shared commitment to creating something unprecedented. The week before opening, Kenji gathered the entire team for a final training session. They met in the restaurant space itself, now completely transformed from its previous incarnation. The heavy curtains and dim lighting of Sakura Garden had been replaced with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in floods of natural light. The cramped hierarchical table arrangement had given way to a mix of communal tables, intimate booths, and flexible seating that could be reconfigured based on needs. The kitchen was open, visible from the dining room, demystifying the cooking process and inviting connection between chefs and guests. Kenji stood in the center of the space, and the team gathered around him in a circle. He looked at each face, taking his time, acknowledging every person individually before speaking. "You are standing in a space that represents hope," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the open room. "Hope that we can build something better than what came before. Hope that mistakes can become teachers rather than anchors. Hope that every person who enters here will leave feeling more seen, more valued, more human than when they arrived." He gestured around the restaurant, indicating the careful details that had been incorporated throughout. Every element of the space has been designed with intention. The lighting is bright and warm, ensuring everyone is visible and valued rather than hidden in shadow. The tables are at heights that accommodate wheelchairs and people of all sizes. The menu is printed in multiple languages and includes detailed descriptions to welcome people unfamiliar with certain cuisines. The bathroom facilities are gender neutral and designed for universal accessibility. These are not luxuries or special accommodations. They are basic recognitions of human diversity and dignity. Kenji's gaze settled on Maya, and she felt the weight of his expectations and his faith in her. "Miss Chun will tell you her story soon, the story of what brought all of us to this moment. But I want to share something with you first." He raised his right hand, displaying the ring that had become so central to this entire journey. This ring is made from gold that survived an atomic bomb. It carries the essence of people who were destroyed by hatred, fear, and the ultimate expression of violence. I wear it as a reminder of what humans are capable of at our worst, but also as a promise of what we can become at our best. He lowered his hand and looked around the circle again. Every person in this room has experienced judgment, discrimination, or exclusion at some point in their lives. Every person here knows what it feels like to be made invisible, to be deemed not good enough, to be turned away from spaces that should welcome all. We are building the open table not despite those experiences, but because of them. We are transforming our pain into purpose, our mistakes into meaning, our scars into strength. The team was silent, the weight of the moment settling over them like a benediction. Kenji continued, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. "Tomorrow night, we open our doors to the community. There will be critics who say we cannot succeed, that our model is unsustainable, that we are naive idealists. Let them say what they will. We know something they have not yet learned, that the most profitable enterprise is not one that extracts maximum value from customers, but one that generates maximum dignity for all who enter. Success will not be measured by our profit margins, but by the number of people who feel, perhaps for the first time, that they truly belong somewhere." He looked directly at Maya again. "Miss Chun, are you ready to share your story with the world?" Maya felt her heart hammering in her chest, but she nodded firmly. "Yes, Mr. Takahashi, I'm ready. I'm terrified, but I'm ready." Kenji smiled, that warm expression that had become familiar to her over these months. "Fear is appropriate. What you are about to do requires courage, but I have watched you grow over these past months, and I know you have that courage. Tomorrow night, you will stand before our community and transform your worst moment into a gift, a lesson that will help others avoid the same mistakes. That is the highest form of redemption." The training session continued for several more hours, the team rehearsing scenarios, practicing their protocols, and reinforcing their commitment to the restaurant's values. As the evening drew to a close and people began to leave, Maya remained behind, walking through the empty space and imagining it filled with people tomorrow night. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrible moment in the Sakura Garden vestibule to this transformed space that represented everything she had learned and become. Opening night arrived with the kind of nervous energy that makes time simultaneously crawl and race. Maya arrived at the open table at dawn, unable to sleep, needing to be in the space where her redemption would either be realized or shattered. The morning light streaming through the large windows painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment, standing alone in the empty restaurant, she allowed herself to believe that everything might actually work. The team began arriving around 9, each person bringing their own mixture of excitement and anxiety. The kitchen staff immediately threw themselves into preparation, the familiar rhythms of chopping, stirring, and seasoning creating a comforting soundtrack. The front-of-house team reviewed the seating arrangements one more time, ensuring the flow would accommodate both individual diners seeking solitude and groups wanting connection. James moved through the space with quiet efficiency, his years of experience evident in how he anticipated needs and solved problems before they fully materialized. By noon, media had begun gathering outside. The story of the Open Table's founding, the incident that had sparked it, and Kenji Takahashi's radical vision for inclusive hospitality had captured public imagination. There were television cameras, newspaper reporters, food bloggers, and social media influencers all jostling for position. Some were genuinely interested in the restaurant's mission. Others, Maya suspected, were there hoping to witness a spectacular failure they could document for clicks and views. Eleanor found Maya in the office, staring at her notes for the speech she would give that evening. "You don't have to do this," Eleanor said gently, sitting down across. "Mr. Takashi would understand if you decided the public confession was too much. The restaurant can succeed without you making yourself vulnerable in that way." Maya looked up from her notes, which had become a blur of crossed-out words and frantic revisions. "No, I need to do this. Not for Mr. Takahashi or even for the restaurant, for myself. Because if I don't face this publicly, if I don't own what I did and who I was, then I'm still hiding. I'm still protecting myself at the expense of the truth. And the whole point of this place is that we don't hide anymore. We show up as we are, flaws and all, and we trust that honesty creates connection rather than division." Eleanor studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then let me tell you something that might help. Mr. Takahashi was married to Yuki for 63. In all that time, I worked with both of them for the last 20 years of her life. Do you know what she used to say about courage?" Maya shook her head. Eleanor smiled, a sad, warm expression. "She used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else matters more than the fear. Tonight you're deciding that truth and growth matter more than your fear of judgment. That's the highest form of courage." The hours between noon and the 6 o'clock opening passed in a blur of final preparation. The kitchen sent out test dishes for the team to sample, ensuring everything met the standards they had set. The bar staff mixed and remixed signature cocktails named after concepts rather than ingredients. Drinks called belonging and recognition and second chance. The host stand was stocked with the colored tokens that would allow guests to pay according to their means without stigma or shame. Everything was ready, or as ready as it could be. At 5:30, Kenji arrived, and the energy in the room shifted perceptibly. He moved through the space slowly, examining details, speaking quietly with staff members, his presence somehow calming the nervous electricity that had been building all day. He was dressed as he always was, in simple, well-made clothing that bore no designer labels or status markers. The ring gleamed on his right hand. He found Maya in the dining room, standing near the window and looking out at the growing crowd of people waiting outside. Some were clearly there for the spectacle, but others, Maya noticed, looked genuinely excited. Families and couples and individuals who had read about the restaurant's mission and wanted to be part of something meaningful. "Are you ready, Miss Chun?" Kenji asked, coming to stand beside her. Maya took a deep breath and turned to face him. "I don't know if I'll ever truly be ready to publicly admit what I did, to stand in front of all these people and all those cameras and confess my prejudice and ignorance. But I'm going to do it anyway because you taught me that readiness is overrated. Action is what matters. Growth is what matters. Becoming better than who you were, that's what matters." Kenji nodded slowly, his dark eyes holding hers with that familiar intensity. "There's one more thing I want you to know before the doors open." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Maya felt her breath catch, recognizing the size and shape. "When my wife passed away 2 years ago, she left behind very few material possessions. She had no interest in accumulating things, only in accumulating experiences and relationships. But there was one piece of jewelry she treasured above all others, something I had made for her on our 20th wedding anniversary." He opened the box, revealing a ring similar to his own but smaller, more delicate. It bore the same crane and wisteria design, the same rich amber gold, but it was scaled for a woman's hand. "This was Yuki's ring," Kenji said softly. "It is made from the same gold as mine, from the remnants of our family's possessions that survived the bombing. She wore it every day for 43 years, and when she died, she asked me to give it to someone who embodied the values she held most dear, someone who had the courage to confront their own flaws, the humility to learn from mistakes, and the commitment to building a more just and compassionate world." He held the box out to Maya, who stared at it in shock. "And Mr. Takahashi, I couldn't possibly, this is too much." Kenji's expression was firm but kind. "You can and you will. This ring is not a reward for being perfect. It is a recognition of your willingness to be imperfect. to grow, to change. Yuki would have loved you, Miss Chun. She would have seen in you the same potential I see. Please honor her memory by wearing this and remembering always what it represents. With trembling hands, Maya took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her right hand. It fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. The weight of it was substantial, grounding, a physical reminder of responsibility and possibility. She looked down at the crane with its spread wings, the wisteria blossoms forming a circle around it, and felt tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for trusting me with this, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. I swear I will honor Yuki's memory and your faith in me every single day. Kenji placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of affection and solidarity. I know you will. Now let us open these doors and show the world what true hospitality looks like. At precisely 6 o'clock, James unlocked the front door and the crowd outside began to file in. The first guests were an elderly couple who moved slowly with canes, their clothing worn but clean. They approached the host stand with expressions of uncertainty, clearly unsure if they were dressed appropriately for what appeared to be an upscale establishment. Maya stepped forward, her new ring catching the light, and greeted them with a warmth that came from the very core of her being. Welcome to the open table. We're so glad you're here. Please let me show you to your seats. The couple's faces transformed, uncertainty giving way to relief and then to something like joy. As Maya led them to a comfortable booth near the window, she heard the woman whisper to her husband, "Did you hear that?" She said she was glad we were here. When was the last time anyone was glad we were anywhere? The words hit Maya with the force of revelation. This was why the work mattered. Not for grand philosophical reasons or abstract ideals, but for moments like this, for making people feel that their presence in the world was valued and valuable. As the evening progressed and more guests arrived, Maya witnessed the restaurant's mission coming to life in real time. A businessman in an expensive suit sat at a communal table next to a young mother with her children. The two groups initially separate but gradually beginning to talk, finding common ground in their shared humanity. A group of college students pooled their resources to pay for one meal, using the token system without shame, while at the next table an elderly patron quietly purchased extra tokens to leave for future diners who might need them. The kitchen sent out dish after dish, each one prepared with the same care and attention regardless of what the person eating it had paid. The open kitchen concept allowed diners to watch the chef's work, to see the respect and artistry that went into every plate, to understand that this was not charity, but genuine hospitality extended equally to all. The dining room buzzed with conversation and laughter, different languages and accents mixing into a symphony of human connection. At 7:30, it was time for Maya to give her speech. A small platform had been set up in the center of the dining room, with a microphone that would carry her words throughout the space and to the cameras recording for media outlets. Eleanor dimmed the lights slightly and called for attention. The conversations gradually quieted and Maya felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward her. She stepped onto the platform, her legs shaking, her new ring feeling both heavy and weightless on her finger. She looked out at the faces before her, such a beautiful diversity of humanity, and she saw Kenji standing in the back of the room, his expression calm and encouraging. Next to him stood James, Chloe, and other members of the team who had become her family over these transformative months. She saw critics and supporters, skeptics and believers, all waiting to hear what she had to say. Maya took a breath and began to speak, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. My name is Maya Chun, and I am the reason this restaurant exists. Not because I had a vision for inclusive hospitality or because I understood the importance of dignity and respect for all. I am the reason this restaurant exists because 6 months ago I made a terrible mistake that revealed the prejudice and ignorance I didn't know I carried. She paused, letting the confession settle over the room. The silence was absolute, everyone leaning forward to hear what came next. 6 months ago, an elderly man walked into the restaurant where I worked. He was dressed in worn clothing, simple and modest, and I looked at him for exactly 7 seconds before deciding he didn't belong in our upscale establishment. I turned him away at the door, citing our dress code, making a judgment about his worth based entirely on his appearance. I didn't know that the man I was turning away was Kenji Takahashi, the owner of the building, a legendary businessman and a man who had survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and built an empire on principles, dignity, and respect for all people. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Maya saw some people glancing toward where Kenji stood, then back to her. She continued, her voice steady now despite the tears streaming down her face. But the worst part wasn't that I failed to recognize his importance. The worst part was that I failed to recognize his humanity. I looked at a human being, person with a lifetime of experiences and stories and worth, and I reduced him to a costume judgment made in seconds. I denied him service on what happened to be the anniversary of his first business in America, disrupting a personal tradition of reflection and remembrance. I caused him pain because I had absorbed a culture of exclusivity without ever questioning whether that culture was right. She held up her right hand, showing the ring that now adorned it. This ring belonged to Yuki Takahashi, Mr. Takahashi's late wife. It is made from gold that survived an atomic bomb, from jewelry that belonged to family members who perished in that blast. Mrs. Takahashi wore it for 43 years as a reminder of where she came from and what she had survived. Mr. Takahashi gave it to me not because I deserve it, but because he believes in second chances. He believes that our worst moments can become catalysts for our greatest growth if we have the courage to confront them honestly and learn from them completely. Maya looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as she could. I spent 6 months in intensive training, learning to recognize and overcome my biases, listening to the stories of people who have experienced discrimination and exclusion, understanding the systems that taught me to judge people by their appearance rather than their character. I have done this work not to absolve myself of guilt, because what I did cannot and should not be erased, but to ensure I never cause that kind of pain again, to ensure that this restaurant becomes the opposite of what I represented that night. She gestured around the dining room at the diverse crowd of people sharing space and meals together. The open table exists because Mr. Takahashi saw my mistake not as an ending but as a beginning. He saw an opportunity to create a space that embodies the values I value, where every person who enters is welcomed with the same respect and care, regardless of how they look, what they wear, or how much money they can spend. This restaurant is a statement that true hospitality has nothing to do with exclusivity and everything to do with seeing and honoring the inherent dignity in every human being. Maya's voice broke slightly, but she pushed through. I stand before you tonight not as someone who has arrived at perfect understanding or who will never make another mistake. I stand before you as someone who is committed to the ongoing work of growth and change, who understands that we are all capable of causing harm through our unconscious biases and unexamined assumption. If my story can help even one person recognize their own prejudice before acting on them, if my public shame can prevent someone else from experiencing what Mr. Takahashi experienced, then it will have been worth it. She looked toward the back of the room where Kenji stood. Mr. Takahashi, thank you for seeing potential in me that I didn't see in myself. Thank you for responding to my worst moment with grace and wisdom instead of punishment. Thank you for teaching me that redemption is not about erasing the past, but about building a better future. And thank you for trusting me to help create this space that honors your life's work and your late wife's memory. The room erupted in applause, but Maya barely heard it. She was watching Kenji, who had tears streaming down his weathered face. His hand pressed over his heart in a gesture of profound emotion. He nodded to her, a single movement that conveyed more than words ever could. Approval, gratitude, recognition, and love. As Maya stepped down from the platform, people approached her from all directions. Some wanted to thank her for her honesty. Others wanted to share their own stories of discrimination and exclusion, of times they had been judged unfairly, or had made similar mistakes themselves. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes took Maya's hand and said, I was refused service at a store last week because of my hijab. What you did tonight, admitting your mistake and working to be better, that gives me hope that people can change. Thank you for your courage. The evening continued with an energy that felt almost sacred. The food was exceptional, the service warm and attentive, and the atmosphere buzzed with genuine human connection. Maya watched from various points in the restaurant, seeing her team execute the vision they had all worked so hard to create. She saw James guiding a confused elderly patron to their table with gentle patience. She saw Chloe laughing with a family at one of the communal tables, making their children feel special and seen. She saw kitchen staff sending out meals with notes of encouragement tucked beside them, personal touches that transformed transactions into moments of genuine care. Near the end of service, around 10 o'clock, Kenji found Maya in a quiet corner where she had retreated to catch her breath. He sat down across from her without speaking, and they remained in companionable silence for several minutes, watching the last few tables finish their meals. Finally, Kenji spoke, his voice soft but clear. You did well tonight, Miss Chun, very well. The speech required immense courage, and you delivered it with honesty and grace. Yuki would have been proud. Maya looked down at the ring on her finger, turning it slowly the way she had seen Kenji do so many times. I keep thinking about what you said, about how anger is like carrying a hot coal. I realize now that guilt can be the same way. I've been carrying my guilt about what I did to you, letting it burn me from the inside. But tonight, telling the story, owning it publicly, I felt something shift. The guilt transformed into something else. Not gone, but different. Purpose instead of pain. Kenji smiled, that warm expression that transformed his weathered face. That is exactly right. We cannot change the past, cannot undo our mistakes, but we can choose what we build from them. You have built something beautiful, Miss Chan. Not just this restaurant, though it is magnificent, but a new version of yourself. That is the most valuable construction of all. Over the following months, the open table became more than just a restaurant. It became a movement, a proof of concept that radical inclusivity and financial sustainability could coexist. The media coverage from opening nights sparked conversations about bias and discrimination in the hospitality industry and beyond. Other restaurants began examining their own practices, questioning whether their standards truly served their stated values. The sliding scale payment system was studied by economists and social scientists as a potential model for other businesses. Most importantly, thousands of people who had previously felt unwelcome in upscale dining establishments found a place where they truly belonged. Maya continued to tell her story, speaking at hospitality conferences, university class, community events. Each telling became easier, but she never let it become rote or mechanical. She understood that her story's power lay in its emotional truth, in her willingness to remain vulnerable and honest about her failure and growth. She received hate mail from people who thought she was virtue signaling or performing penance for publicity. She received love letters from people who had experienced similar moments of recognition about their own biases and were inspired by her commitment to change. 1 year after opening night, the Open Table held an anniversary celebration. The restaurant was packed with regulars, supporters, media, and community members. Kenji gave a short speech praising the team's work and the community's embrace of their vision. Then he asked Maya to step forward and he presented her with a document. "This is the deed to this building," he said clearly for everyone to hear. "Effective today, the Open Table owns the space it occupies. You will never have to worry about rent increases or lease renewal. This place is yours, permanently, to continue the work we have begun together." Maya stared at the document in shock, unable to process the magnitude of the gift. "But Mr. Takahashi, this is too much. I cannot possibly." Kenji raised a hand gently to stop her protest. "You asked me once what lesson I needed to learn from our encounter. I told you that I needed to be reminded that people can change, that hope is justified. You have given me that reminder every single day for the past year. This is not charity, Miss Chun. This is investment in a future where dignity and respect are not privileges for the few, but rights for all. Continue the work. Honor Yuki's memory. Build the world we all deserve to live in." The celebration continued late into the night, and as Maya stood in the restaurant she now owned, surrounded by people from every walk of life sharing food and stories and laughter, she understood something profound. Her worst moment had indeed become her greatest opportunity, but not in the way she had initially imagined. It wasn't about personal redemption or professional success. It was about discovering that transformation was always possible, that mistakes could be taught, and that the space between who we are and who we can become is bridged by courage, humility, and the willingness to grow. She looked at the ring on her finger, the crane with its spread wings, and she thought about all it represented: survival and loss, love and memory, tradition and innovation, pain and hope. The ring had traveled from the ashes of Hiroshima to a restaurant in a modern American city, carrying with it the dreams and sacrifices of people who had believed that a better world was possible even when everything around them suggested otherwise. Maya made a silent promise to Kenji and Yuki, to herself, and to everyone who would walk through the Open Table's doors in the years to come. She would honor their gift by never forgetting the lesson of that terrible night. Every person deserves to be seen. Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves a place at the table. And sometimes the most profound change in the world begins with a single mistake, 7 seconds of judgment, and the courage to transform failure into a bridge towards something better.